Similar to the Partner Pulse Hangout I did a couple of weeks ago, so apologies if you've seen that as well, but this does give you a forum to hopefully ask some questions that you might not have got to have asked on the Google Hangouts. If you're ever thinking of using Google Hangouts, a bloody nightmare. Okay, so what is the DMS? Marketing at Sitecore and all the wonderful salespeople will tell you that it's basically a bunch of tools built into Sitecore that allows you to promote, optimize, test, and track performance of content on websites. You'll probably hear that I've got this thing called a metric called engagement value, and that's what we assign to goals, and we'll talk a little about that now. But ultimately, the foundation of all of this is the analytics database. So we're going to talk a little bit about that now. Just in case you weren't bought by the message on the previous slide, where does this sort of stuff fit in? We've got that CMS thing that we've had for a few years now, and we're pretty good at selling in some respects. That does websites and intranets and all that kind of stuff. Over the last 3 or 4 years, for those who've been working with Sitecore for that long, who remembers OMS? Hey, that sounds like a pain. Even worse. Okay, not adjusted. Now we've advanced this OMS thing, and it's called the DMS, and you get all this stuff here. So you get to track, engage, optimize, all very marketing, all very fluffy. So what we're going to focus on, DMS only, and we're just going to focus on the analytics and the goals tonight. The rest of it, there's plenty of documentation. I'm doing a series of lots of different types of webinars and hangouts and stuff about those. So, a bit of an agenda. I'm going to talk about the database, how we install it, why we have things like bot exclusion, why we have goals, and then a little bit about the dashboards. This is all practical stuff. I'm not going to talk to you about why marketers should use this and how they should use it, and best practice, and SEO and all that kind of stuff. We're purely talking about the practicalities of getting this thing running as part of our projects. So it's a standard Microsoft SQL Server database. Absolutely nothing special. There's nothing complex about it. There's nothing that runs in reporting services or analysis services. It's exactly the same in its makeup as the core webmaster, web forms, and all those types of databases. It runs on SQL 2008 and 2012. Just as a gotcha, in case anybody's done this, if you do decide to upgrade to 2012 in your production environment, there's absolutely no backwards compatibility, as with previous versions, but let's say I've wasted several days of my time after making a bit of a casual upgrade to get hold of some new features, which I didn't think would ruin all 38 of my databases on my laptop. And Andy's, yeah. Now, it will run on Express Web Standard Enterprise Data Center, all versions, but Express and Web will have limits. And what does this thing do? Well, it captures amongst lots of other information, traffic sources, page views, goals completed, page build profiles, devices, browsers, all that kind of stuff, automation states, and we're getting up into the more mature features of the digital marketing system. You could say that it's a replacement for Google Analytics in terms of what it collects. Obviously, this is based server-side. It's not necessarily a client-side JavaScript, bunging it up in the cloud, no idea where my data goes, and no idea whether Google's telling me whether it's accurate or not. That's not shot across the bows, it's just how it is. So, infrastructure stuff. So if you're running a Sitecore Primary Edition, then you basically bung it on the same SQL server as your core web and master databases, and it'll run fine, for low traffic sites. If you're into Pro and Enterprise editions and you have higher traffic primaries, then you may want to put the analytics database on its own SQL instance just to cope with the load, just to make sure you're not competing for SQL reads and writes with your master web databases. Actually, some of that can be abstracted if you're using Sitecore 7 and returning from the index, but it's the sort of consideration you need to make. There is, if you do get into more high traffic sites, the ability to do a collection and a reporting database. So your collection database sits near your delivery servers, and that again can be on its own database. And that SQL Server database will probably collect maybe a week, 2 weeks, whatever you set the config files, but a week's worth of data. And then there will be a job that takes that data from the collection and plugs it back to reporting, which is located physically near your content management server, where your dashboards are then going to be reading from. There's lots of configuration settings if you start going to that level. You need to be conscious of things like automation states. So if you're using marketing automation, you need to set web configs to say which database is the marketing automation table stored in, and then you can split them out again even further if you have to. This analytics configuration reference guide from 3.7 onwards will tell you all about what you need to know there. So if you're getting into any of that, read that. Main reason is if you deploy and you haven't got the right infrastructure in place and you haven't separated out your areas of concern correctly, you could end up with data inaccuracies and all sorts of wonderful problems, which the customer is naturally going to be pretty upset because their data is going to be all over their shit. Now,
there's a problem accessing this site.
What, this one?
It says that I'm not a partner, but I am a partner.
Oh, drop me an email, I'll make sure you get access.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, if you don't have access to SDN, I assume you're a certified dev.
No, it's it's analytics part. I believe it's different Sitecore instance running. So
Is that SPN? Possibly, that could be SPN. Drop me an email, I'll make sure you get access. That's fine. That goes for everybody. If you're struggling to get access to any of these links, obviously you're all partners and customers, so I just need to make sure you've got access through CRM. There is an SSSI job that will move data from your collection to your reporting databases. How many customers here run delivery servers in different geographic locations, separate data centers? 1, 2, 3, yeah, okay, so we've got 3 or 4 customers. Okay, so if you have analytic customers who have got different geographically dispersed delivery servers, the DMS will not scale to allow you to run in separate data centers yet. You can only have one collection and one reporting database, or going back, just one Sitecore Analytics database. You can try SQL reads from that data center across to the other data center in collection. Naturally, that's going to cause you a bit of an issue. We're open and honest about that. There's a new project coming, which is almost being delivered in Sitecore, called Andes, which is going to address a lot of those scaling issues and allow you to put DMS data all across the globe wherever you like, and then string it all together and make it nice and lovely. So, if you have higher traffic distributed environments in an enterprise type edition and you want to roll with DMS, then you need to give me a call and I will have options for you, but you won't find them in those guides. So, sizing. 4 core, 4 gig for your SQL Server, standard Sitecore requirements. We've got customers who are running some quite seriously high traffic through single data center, maybe 4 delivery server environments. They run their SQL servers with 64 gig and 32 cores. They can handle most stuff. We've also got customers who are running on 4 core, 4 gig virtualized SQL servers. Absolutely fine. The Sitecore system has lots and lots of configuration settings for how much you build up in memory and then how much you flush down to the database at any given time. And there's lots of stuff in one of the next webinars, we've got some performance statistics from different customers we're going to share to make sure you're aware of where the boundaries lie. Obviously, your delivery server should meet the minimum requirements for Sitecore. I had a discussion with a hosting company a couple of days ago who was advising, they use that word liberally, with their partner, and they said, oh, well, when you're virtualizing delivery service in Sitecore, you don't need more than 2 cores because the application just can't utilize it. That's a load of rubbish. All right? The Sitecore system, or the Sitecore installation guide says 4 core, 4 gig minimum, 8 core, 8 gig recommended. This whole idea of one virtualized EC or CPU and then 2 gig of RAM for SQL and delivery servers, if you do that, the measures that I've managed to get from that type of environment after then moving and doing a performance test upon moving it up to 8 core, 8 gig, I was able to increase capacity by 150 times. And that's because Sitecore is an asynchronous application. What happens in the front end is not necessarily concerned with what's happening in the background in terms of flushing that data and managing it. So if you get hosting companies that try and sell you on their crappy little virtualized vSphere infrastructures and you've got high traffic, question it. And if you're not sure, then get in touch with one of us or do some performance testing. So of interest, I've been using a couple of load testing tools. One is called webperformanceloadtest.com. They have a really good model. So they've got a professional version where you can pay quite a bit of money, $900 a month, I think you have to get started with. And they will provide all your load testing from the cloud. So you get a little application on your desktop and you can then go through and record all your stories and then pay them to do load testing. There's lots of advanced features and lots of stuff comes in the Pro version, but I've been using the Lite version and it's really good. If you have an Amazon AWS account, you can install the application on your desktop, go connect to my Amazon Web Services account, and then from the application on your desktop, it will connect over to Amazon Web Services and spin up instances of their own AMIs, and they will then be controlled by your desktop app. You do need to make sure you have some certain ports open between the Amazon Web Services, but then you only pay for the time that those machines are active. So if you're running a 30-minute test and you're putting, say, 2, 3, 4,000 users, consistently through, my tests were coming in at 40 quid. It's really good value, and I only do 5 or 6 a month for different customers. So I can put some serious load through customer sites, and again, it comes off my Amazon Web Services, goes on my credit card. It's nice and easy to manage. I should probably also mention there's an official Sitecore testing partner called Apica, and you can find them on the website. I haven't really used them very much, but they appear to be very good. So, installing the DMS. Right. I thought I'd pick a Mimi. This one sounded pretty apt. Now, you don't simply turn on the DMS and get going. And the reason for that is customers aren't ready for it in some respects. There's all this amazing behavioural profiling and goals and campaigns and all this kind of stuff that they're doing in other areas with things like Google Analytics and Kissmetrics and HubSpot and all those types of things. So it's not a case of just turning on and getting started with the customer, but it is a case of turning on and getting started when you deploy their site. People want basic analytics, and you might want 6 months worth of statistics before you sit down with your customer and then go through all of those, bits and all those different, sort of mature processes such as behavioural profiling and marketing automation. But in reality, you don't install the DMS; you just enable it. So when you download Sitecore 6.5, 6.6.7, the binaries and all of the code required for the DMS are in that main installer. So when you download that zip, when you get your package down, that is all the DMS inside it. The only thing that you do need is a database and a config file. So obviously you need the analytics database structure to hook up and then point your connection string to that database. And then you need to just drop in the sitecore.analytics.config into the app include folder, and that will then suddenly bring to life inside the CMS all of the bits required, mostly in the page editor, the marketing center, and so on. Naturally, you can download it from that link, which will take you to the STN downloads page for Sitecore 7 Update 2. Some things that you need to think about before you install. If you have customers on 6.4, you're probably not going to find much use of the DMS, so you need to get them onto at least 6.5. If you're sensible, you'll move them up to 6.6 or 7, and ideally, you'll be on 6.6 Update 6. The main reason is that there's been lots of bug fixes, lots of improvements, lots of UI work. As normal with Sitecore, we improve things on a regular basis. So get up to that version if you're going to get started with DMS from today, and ideally move on to 7. So Sitecore 7 update or initial release has the same code base as Sitecore 6.6 plus all the search kit on top. 6.6 Update 6 will no longer be updated now. That's now finished, and we're now moving into 7 Update 1 and Update 2. I'm probably seeing Sitecore 7.1 sometime in the new year. Don't ask me what's in 7.1, I'm not going to tell you. So, you need to attach it to a SQL server. Again, if you're using separate collection reporting, you need to do that, and there's a guide that's available for that. Add the connection string, drop the config into the include. You need to make sure this is set from false to true, otherwise nothing's going to happen. There's loads more settings that sit underneath that, and you're free to explore those in your own time. We'll try what happens. Full publish, clear cache, usual sort of stuff when you install some Sitecore goodies. So how do you tell whether it's working? Well, you need to go onto your site after publishing and view some pages. And then what you're going to do is you're going to go, yeah, let me go to the dashboard. And then you go to the dashboard and you see nothing. And that's what happens because there is a minimum visits filter inside the configuration. So Sitecore won't start reporting data until it gets 50 visits. That's not hits, that's visits. So again, the visit will not end until you close the browser, and the visit end pipeline is then called, so then flushes it out of memory down into the database, getting a little bit more deeper into how this thing works. But what you can do is close the browser, repeat 3 or 4 times, go straight to your SQL Management Studio and run that query. And you'll then start to see some data, and then you'll probably get quite curious, and then you'll start exploring the database structures, and we'll have a look at some of it later on. So if you want to see data in the dashboard, you can sit and do that 50 times if you want, until you start seeing some data. Otherwise, you can go right down into the Sitecore shell applications, and I'm sure you all love making changes to the core Sitecore shell and source controlling all that kind of stuff. I certainly do. But that's what you're going to have to do if you want to see data in the dashboard from there. When you get into that file, you'll see there's all sorts of wonderful stuff in here as well. So there's chart page sizes, there is date time formats, there is the default dashboards that are shown. So whilst the Silverlight dashboards, you can't necessarily extend them and add your own report yet. You can go in and set which is the default dashboard, and we'll talk a bit about that later on. So, configuring bot exclusions. Anybody know what a bot is? Yeah, Google, crawler, Bing, that kind of stuff. Stuff that basically comes to the site, has a good old rummage around, and then goes and reports stuff. Something to do with inbound search marketing, all that kind of stuff. Naturally, we don't want that in our reports, so we need to configure bot exclusions. Sitecore's pretty good out of the box at detecting all the relevant, mainstream robots, especially for the UK, USA, and most European regions. We're not necessarily keeping up in China. They've got lots of stuff that goes on your site, does funny things, and then decides whether you're appropriate as a business and all that kind of stuff. So if you're deploying sites in that area, then you should probably tweak this quite a little bit more. So it's turned on by default, and the system will drop the sessions. So as soon as they come onto the site will continue to load, but it will then stop the sessions. It won't even go anywhere near the memory, it won't go near the cache, so they're not going to be flushed out to the database. If, for whatever reason, you decide that you do want that data in the reports, you can turn it off. I'm sure somebody was writing a backlog item a couple of years ago in Sitecore and went, well, just let them turn it off. Not quite sure why. But inside the excluderobots.config, there is a whole list, a pipe-separated list of all the different user agent strings that you can then exclude. And all of the bot strings as well. And you can add your own in there, you can do all sorts of stuff. Every time we update Sitecore, obviously we're adding new ones in as we find them. If you're finding new ones that you see in common, then raise a support ticket, make a suggestion, and then you'll soon find that back into the core product. So, setting up goals. Let's do a little bit of workshop-y type stuff. So, hands up, who can tell me what a typical goal would be on any given website you're working on?
Completed contact form.
Completed a contact form, fantastic. Anything else? Okay, what was that? Download a brochure, yeah. Anything else?
View at least 3 pages.
Sorry?
View at least 3 pages.
View at least 3 pages, yeah, that could be a goal, absolutely. Okay, so yeah, we pretty much ascertain what goals are. They are all of the micro actions that happen on the website before you get to that end goal and conversion. E-commerce sites obviously have a monetary conversion, non-e-commerce sites don't. In Google Analytics, they might track the odd goal here and assign, just a denominational number against it. But the engagement value concept is slightly different, and what that says is we have a scale. We have likes, tweets, comments, ratings, downloads, watching a video, watching it halfway through, watching it all the way through, maybe then signing up, registering. They all have different levels of intent. They reveal intent about what the user's doing. So let's talk a little bit about marketing and what they need to know about that. Well, marketing want to be able to track that goal, and then they want to be able to do attribution to either a traffic source or a campaign. So they can say, okay, well, we did this outbound campaign, we got 1,000 visits from this one, 500 visits from that one. In the current world, they'll go, yeah, that one was the winner because it generated more clicks and more visits. Yeah, really? Did those 1,000 people come on the site, view one page and sod off, and those 500 people come on the site, do lots of likes, lots of downloads, lots of shares? And then how can we then understand which are the higher value actions they completed and then start doing campaign attribution modelling around that? So with the goals, we define them in the marketing center, we give them a name, we give them a points value, 5 points for a like, 50 points for a sign up, 100 points for a download. You decide the scale, so we'll talk a little bit about this. Essentially, it's a way of measuring the performance. It is a qualitative metric rather than a quantitative metric. In other words, it allows us to get an understanding of value, what it's worth to the business. Here's an example of a engagement value scale. So as the value increases, the demonstration of commitment increases. And again, marketing like to know this type of data. So we could assign 5, 15, 25, 50, 100. Who's responsible for these goals? You? Well, maybe the client, maybe somebody else in your organisation, but somebody needs to define these throughout the process. There's no point in just installing the analytics engine and then just running off and creating a bunch of goals. Quite frankly, whilst you're awesome developers, the chances are you'll get those wrong and they'll mean nothing to the business in terms of what the KPIs are. So get somebody to understand with the client what those engagement value goals are, and then get them to give you a list and you can set them up in the system. There's a really nice guide there which is written by a guy called Ron Person who works in our corporate SBOS team, and he's written loads of methodology. So if you go back to the project manager and say, look, I was about to use the word boss then, but that's horrendous using that. But I was going to say, look, Mr. Project Manager, I need to set some goals up. What are the values? They will likely turn around to you and go, what? They'll probably have heard from their account manager, who's their Sitecore representative, that they need to do all this DMS type stuff. But point them at that guide, and that will give them a good head start. If they still don't understand, get them to phone me, and I'll make sure they understand. Either by force or we're lying off. So once we've then started to collect these goals, what happens? Well, we get a dashboard that looks like this, and we are able to understand how effective a traffic source is by comparing the overall value as well as the visits. There's a really good quote from a guy called John Wanamaker, American entrepreneur, years ago. He says, I know half my marketing budget's wasted, I just don't know which half. So the idea is that with this engagement value concept, we can start doing attribution to value to understand which campaigns, where should we spend more money, where should we spend less money. Anyway, enough of that. So where do I find these goals? You can go into Desktop Marketing Center or into the Content Editor, down to System Marketing Center, and then Goals. They're just content items. Very simple, very easy. They only have a few fields, and they are absolutely tied to a very simple workflow. That workflow does one thing, and that basically allows you to put it inside the analytics database. So there is a table called Page Event Definitions. you need to hit that deploy button on your goal, and when you edit a goal value, so in other words, if you go and edit that 25 and increase it to 35, you then need to redeploy that through workflow, so it updates the definition inside the analytics database. You also need to publish it to the web database so that when the web request comes in, you can actually then evaluate it and record it to said database, and the two things start to line up. So there's a whole bunch of values that you can set. Name, you need to set the name. There's no real best practice advice that I can give you on terms of the name. I would obviously make them descriptive. If you have large sites or multiple sites within one Sitecore installation, you may prefix them with a site definition. You may have cross-site goals, or you may have individual site goals. You can use folders within inside the Marketing Center goals area, so you can then folder those up. Engagement value points, we talked about how we get those. Kind of leave that to somebody else and leave it up to the business to define those. The category. As you often find in Sitecore, you find a field that has no use at all. This is one of those. There is a description. Again, that's just an internal field. There is a little bit of use there because you can then describe. I have in our demo site converted that to a rich text field so you can actually make it a little bit more descriptible. Now, if you are wanting to trigger a goal that registers these points in the database, you need to make sure this is ticked. It is ticked by default, but if that's not ticked, it will not be evaluated as a goal. There are other ways you can use goals, such as referential goals that do not have an engagement value point. So you're saying, if a customer's viewed 3 pages, that might be a referential goal, because it's not valuable to the organisation to record as an engagement value point, but you may want to track it for other purposes. So again, you can use that, and there's quite a lot of documentation around this when you start to get into DMS, and I'm sure I'll cover it at some point in the future. So how do I trigger these bloody goals? So naturally, when Sitecore goes out and pitches to clients, we go, yeah, you can do all that in the UI, it's easy. Just click a few buttons, just set the goals up, don't worry. And the demo's really, really well. Sells Sitecore, keeps us all in business. But as you know, these types of goals aren't viewing a page. They aren't necessarily always clicking on a button as such that is generated by web forms for marketers. So whilst you can set page views as goals and web form for marketers completions in the UIs, probably not going to be doing that an awful lot. Most of the goals are going to be things like this: Ajaxing back a save button, or logging into my crest, or register, or signing in. This is a site I was working with just last week where we've been defining those. So again, all done in code. This is an MVC based site, so again, all handled using MVC and done through the API. There is this one in the middle, which I kind of skipped over a little bit, and that's where you can trigger the SC track query string. I've not really found a use for it yet. You might create some kind of JavaScript SDK to register goals or do something. I'm sure you'll find your own uses. As you would expect with Sitecore, there are some inconsistencies in the way that you use that query string. So with campaigns, when a campaign is generated, you use a GUID. So you use SC_camp and then the GUID of the campaign item. With this, you don't use the GUID of the goal item, you use the name. Incredibly crazy. There's a backlog item in Sitecore, so I'm hoping that will be available in 7.1 and will support both names for legacy customers and then GUIDs for those who want to do it properly. Yeah, just little gotchas that you need to be aware of. Some people do spend hours putting GUIDs in there wondering why it's not returning. That's the reason why. So, because we need to use the API, we're going to need some code for that. So we'll get onto the code in a moment. This is an example of where you can set a goal. So if you go into a page and you go into Analyze and Goals, you'll then get a list of goals. And I've set up one here viewed as a strategic page, for example, as one of those referential 0 points type goals. You will not normally, when you set those engagement value points, use viewing a page as a goal and register points against it. Every person comes on a website and views a page. You may use a referential 0 points value goal to track a really important page, maybe like investor relations or something along those lines. But again, look to the best practices guide and understand how we want to do that attribution if you do get into the nitty-gritty of setting those points. In Web Forms for Marketers, when you create a form, you'll get a little screen like this in the wizard, and you can also go up to the Properties Analytics, and that will then give you a list of goals, or you can create ones on the fly when you design forms. So, the query string, here's an example, page, put it in. If you call SC track on the page it's on, it will register the goal against that particular page. There are some other query string parameters you can place on if you want to just trigger that goal and pass in your own page values. Again, I'm not quite sure why that functionality exists, but I'm sure one of you will thank me for having it. Yeah.
There's one place you might want to use that is if you have a page that you don't always want to register a goal on,
Yeah.
but maybe it's also used as a thank you page or some landing page, but if they came directly to that somehow,
Yeah.
you could use a query string to only be triggered when you have an query string on it.
Yeah, makes good sense if you're doing something. Yeah, quite. Yeah, makes sense. Just saying, I'm sure you'll find reasons, and areas to use that. One thing that I have found that quite useful is if you're passing back to just a service handler, if you're doing Facebook type work. So if you're doing custom Facebook pages where you're embedding Sitecore pages as the iframe, you can pick up the Facebook JavaScript SDK and then use that to register back rather than having to post back every time. So you could use that in some weird and wonderful scenarios. So some code. Very simple. You need to access a site called analytics.tracker. This is where you can then start to set a new page event data type, and then you give it the name of the page event definition. Again, no GUIDs here. This is name-based. There is a huge backlog item open to refine this process. You can pass in a couple of values, for example, data and text, and you can also pass in the data key. So very simple. If you start exploring the Analytics.tracker API, you'll find all sorts of wonderful methods in there. So there's things like stop the tracker, start the tracker. There is all sorts of ways that you can then start to control how much data you build up when you're doing single page applications, and how to register your own page calls rather than having to rely on the site called item path every time you pass back. So if you want to know more, there is an API cookbook, there's an API reference, which references about 10% of the API calls that are available inside the DLL. As you'd expect from Sitecore documentation, always complete. If not, you get the proper documentation out and reflect the Analytics DLL and start hunting around in there. So, Executive Insight Dashboard. So this is where marketing lives, this is what they want to see, this is where they start to evangelise about where they should spend their money and what they should do and where customers are going and where they're not going, etc. It looks like this. You have a whole range of reports down the right-hand side. You have a date selector. You have date selector on the bottom. You have a site selector, a traffic source or campaign selector, and then the appropriate traffic source definitions and campaigns down the right there. Let's dive in and have a quick look at what that looks like. So I'm going to log into my little site. Some of you may have seen just something else called Analytics there. This is the Engagement Analytics section. This is running on Stimulsoft, the best reporting engine in the world. And that's not ideal, is it? Try that. How's that? There we go, there we go. So this is based on Stimulsoft, and this is essentially a bunch of page-based reports. They do not look sexy at all, but they return every single piece of known data about every single visitor, page view hit, down to the individual time, the IP address. There is a whole world of analytics in here which individual businesses can get involved in. You can customize this to your heart's content if you're that brave, and you can do all sorts of wonderful stuff in there. In reality, though, you're probably going to ignore this, and you're probably going to spend most of your time in this dashboard here. So, this is a Silverlight-based dashboard. You have a date selector where you can then start to understand performance. And again, the key thing here for marketers is that they are recording against this value and value per visit metric. I'm not going to talk to you about this in more detail. You can look at some of my other videos if you want to go there. What I've done with this dashboard here is that when you install Sitecore out of the box, you'll get this channel performance graph as the default chart that you get put up. So this basically gives you a stacked view of where your traffic is coming from on a source basis. And Sitecore works out all of this automatically. Email gets obviously aggregated when you use Sitecore Email Campaign Manager, or you start tagging up your exact target, Silverpart, MailChimp, etc., campaigns with Sitecore campaign codes. There's another video I did about campaign codes last week, so feel free to have a look at that. I've changed it to show visits, because I think visits is a much more appropriate dashboard for when a marketer goes in. And that's where I've gone into the default analytics.config and just swapped around the web.com, so the config values there, just to show the different default reports. this is a Silverlight dashboard. You can't change this, you can't extend it, you can't do anything with it. This is being rewritten at the moment in HTML5, so there will be a new dashboard and Executive Insight dashboard coming, probably sometime February, March time, something like that. You might have seen it on the roadmap. If you have a customer that requires more in-depth analytics than what this can provide, then we have something called the Engagement Intelligence Analyzer, and that's a business intelligence grade tool built on the target system that uses SQL analysis services, OLAP cubes, and then some seriously in-depth MI reports. So something that you need to know, you might not want to know, but you need to know, is that this doesn't do behavioural profile attribution. It doesn't do marketing automation attribution in here. This is purely visits, value, referring sites, and channels, and campaigns. The Executive Insight dashboard is what provides all of that seriously in-depth profile attribution and really powerful MI type dashboards. The beauty of that is that if you want to then plug in cubes such as CRM cubes, or you want to put in delivery, fulfillment, or internal, or phone call cubes, as in OLAP cubes, you can then pull them all in and aggregate Sitecore data against those if you can find a common denominating identifier such as an email address or an internal GUID or an order number or something like that. We've got some really cool prototypes with a couple of organisations recently on bringing all of their sales performance data alongside Sitecore analytics, behavioural profiling and campaign data. And they can now track down to the exact campaign how much the performance the sales guy had based on the profile of the user on the website. So again, we'll talk about that. It's much more high digital maturity in terms of what we're talking about now, but that's where this data can really take the user. There are localized dashboards. Those localized dashboards are existent inside the Marketing Center and also Email Campaign Manager. So let me just show you one of those very quickly. I'm going to go into the Marketing Center, and I have some campaigns running. I won't be talking about campaigns today. Hopefully there'll be some data here. Yay. So that is a localized version of the dashboard. So again, this is showing data in the context of that campaign only. You have less options down the right-hand side here. These are configurable in a separate config file deep inside that Sitecore tree. So you can go in and you can customize this. Naturally, all this data that's being returned to the Silverlight dashboards is available via the Sitecore.analytics.tracker and also the reporting API that comes with that. There's quite a few methods such as load all. There's a .NET developer, DMS.NET developer course you can go on to get access and understand all of that. If not, you can give me a ring. We've got some really nice cool little POCs we've been doing about building custom reports outside of the Sitecore dashboards. So, a couple of things you need to know. You need to have Silverlight installed in the browser. A bit annoying, it's just the way it is. Most people have got Silverlight installed. If you're a developer, then install the Silverlight developer tools plugin as opposed to the standard release version. And then when you're debugging, you can also get access to all of the debug data for this. So if you want to start breaking down into, is my report accurate, what SQL queries are being called. It actually works through a bit of a web service, so the Silverlight basically calls a web service deep inside the Sitecore tree, which will then go and get data for you. So you can exploit that if you want to. It's pretty rudimentary, but feel free to go playing around in there. Application reports dashboard, you've got a configuration where you can set default, minimum visits, filters. We also do things like sampling rates as well. So if you've got customers who want dashboards where they're sampling, percentages of large data sets, we can do all of that. It gets quite advanced, but there's a lot of stuff in there. So we talked a little bit about hardware. You need the minimum requirements, obviously, like we talked about at the beginning of this. You do not have to deploy or set up the goals when you turn on the analytics database. So again, we talked about why we'd set those engagement value points, but you don't have to set those. You could just turn on the analytics database, let it run, and then you're starting to build up lots of nice visit data, lots of nice referral data. Obviously, you may not exploit the value proposition of the DMS if you don't set up the goals when you go live, but that's up to you. I'm not here to tell you what you should and shouldn't do. I'm just here to tell you how you should do it. Plenty of documentation on SDN for developers, plenty of information on SPN for strategy line marketer guys, and if anybody is unsure about any of this whatsoever, give us a call. I might not know the answer, but there are 70 other people sat in my office who likely do know the answer. Whether they'll tell you or not, I don't know, but we get paid by cake and stuff like that, so we're happy. So, a little bit of a summary. We need this engagement analytics database in place to power all of the more advanced capabilities of the system. Campaigns, personalization, testing, profiling. You cannot do any of that without having that engagement analytics database in place. The customer might still want to use Google Analytics, or they might still want to use Omniture or their own analytics tool of choice. I'm sure once they realise the value of Sitecore Analytics, they'll start to migrate. We're seeing lots of customers doing that at the moment, and that's fantastic news. But if you do have this installed, again, you might not be using that data, but you then have the ability to start campaigns, personalisation, testing and profiling and stuff as the customer moves on. Naturally, the benefit to all of this is you have an opportunity to wrap a service proposition around all of these bits of functionality. So you might just be a build agency now, but there are plenty of strategy-led agencies out there who will charge 5 grand, 10 grand, £50,000 a month to do all of this work for their customers. Very big business. I used to be in that business myself before I came to Sitecore, and believe me, the profitability on that compared to dev work was horrendously better. So, again, you might not start utilising this data now, but in 3 to 6 months' time you will. I found a lovely little diagram down there, or sorry, a drawing, as it says. Get all the information you can, or think of a use for it later. The aim is that you should deploy the analytics database with every deployment you do where appropriate. There's no reason not to. The customer is buying into this proposition. If you have existing customers, there's only one caveat that you need to check, is to make sure that if they're a customer older than probably 2.5, 3 years, that they have the rights to use the DMS inside their license. That's something that you can pump back to the project manager or the account director to ask. But that's the only thing you do need to check. So obviously, if you're upgrading to 6.6 and they have a CMS-only license from 4 or 5 years ago, then they can't use it, and they're going to have to part with some cash. That's a sad fact of life, unfortunately. But we do have to get paid. So, I'm a partner. Help me. We have help, guidance, and good old professional consulting services available to all partners. And just to clarify, customers who don't necessarily have a partner, if you are a customer and you have a partner, go and talk to them first. We don't really want to talk to you about that right now, but we will help you partner if they don't know. So in the pre-sales world, there is plenty of strategy and technical expertise, both from a business marketing side and a technical side. You only have to ask. If you're getting down and dirty into implementation, then naturally I would recommend that you go on a training course. But if you're, in the middle of a build and you just need some advice or you want to talk, then again, I'm your point of contact, Kern is your point of contact for that. Either of us will literally get on the phone and help you plan this, we'll help you get this implemented. There is no, oh, well, you need to pay some money and all that kind of stuff. We will just help you. And please don't abuse that, but don't underestimate how willing we are to help. Ongoing. There is lots of optimization strategy, methodology, scaling and growth planning on all that kind of jazz, which is obviously something that you as an organisation can make a business around. But if you're not sure how to make a business case around that, then we have something called SBOS. I'm sure you've heard of it, I'm sure you may have had some interactions with it. It's called Sitecore Business Optimization Services, and you get in touch and we will help you, educate your business and your partner, your partner base around how to do all that work. These guys are so eager, they're off to set up a database now. Let me know how it goes, guys. So, I hope that was a bit of a dispelling myth-style type talk about the DMS database. It just gives you a bit of comfort that it is very simple to get started with. The customer's got existing infrastructure, and in most cases it will fit nicely into that. Where it won't, then great, we can all charge some money, and it's all very good. So Q&A. Far away.
You talk about myths, but one of the reasons why a lot of clients turned off the IMS is because of massive performance problems.
Yep.
I understand that obviously that's better with the DMS. How easy is it to actually customize in terms of actually picking up the data you want but leaving the rest perhaps?
Sure.
Or somehow allowing the service not to come to their needs?
Of course. Yeah, great question. Something I haven't included in the slides here for obvious reasons. The OMS did suffer from some performance issues. The DMS on 6.5 and the first iterations of 6.6 would bring a site to its knees when it gets under seriously high load. We're not precious about that. Nobody underestimated the amount of data that this thing bloody collects. So, 2 things. The reason why I have put in there 6.6 update 6 is I have got performance tests done on very large live sites in single data centres, but on large sites that are load balanced, where we are getting highly acceptable load times. And just to clarify what I mean by that is that the page load is always the same. So the page load will complete and the DOM and everything will render in the same sort of sub 2-3 second time that we're all used to building on the site. But what would happen is so much session-based data and so much memory would start to be chewed up by the system that you were then competing for capacity, not necessarily performance, if that makes sense. So you would get a customer, maybe doing sort of 400 or 500 visitors an hour throughout the day, and then they suddenly get a peak of a couple of thousand, and there was so much data being built up that it wasn't able to flush to the SQL Server quick enough to make these things happen. So 6.6 update 3 brought in a whole range of enhancements to the memory management and the way that worked. Update 4 brought in a whole load of configuration settings for excluding data. So in the analytics.config, you can start to throw away data. So if you don't want to collect the maxmine data for GeoIP lookups, for example, you can use that to evaluate the personalization rules on page delivery and then throw the data away and not store those lookups inside the database, and obviously process them in session. So there's configuration for how much data you collect. However, I won't name the customer, but we've just finished a large, these guys are doing, it's about 15 million a day across 4 load balance delivery servers. And we've completed load testing where we know that we can peak up to 1.5 times that number. So we're now on 6.6 update 6 where we're confident that that will start to, obviously in 7, that this will perform at a level. However, be under no illusion that turning on the DMS will, in my opinion, add a 20 to 25% capacity drop. And by I mean capacity drop, I don't mean the page load time, I mean how much that server can cope with in terms of peak. So that has 2 things. That means you're likely to need more delivery servers to cope if you do have high peak volumes. And obviously the customer will have budgeted for those current servers to last a certain amount of time. They've said, okay, well, they currently cope with X amount now, and we know that we can cope with up to X. Therefore, by that projection, if we grow at the same rate, we'll need to add more servers or change our servers by 18 months from now, 24 months from now. That is naturally going to drop as you increase that. However, those customers where we sat them down and explained to them what that really means versus the amount of data that they collect and the amount of business value this adds, there's only one customer out of about 15 I've worked with in the last 6 to 8 weeks, or actually a bit more longer than that, like 6 to 8 weeks, where we're doing a lot of in-depth work where they've gone, we're not happy with that. And as I said to them, well, if you don't want the data, then that's your problem, not mine. So, you are doing a lot of processing, you're doing a lot of lookups, you're doing a lot of flushing to data. There is also, in the analytics config, loads of settings for how much builds up in memory. So this is naturally where processor usage is not really an issue with delivery servers here. It's more the amount of memory that you have. I always get this with customers saying, yeah, well, we bought 16 gig boxes and the system's using 15. Well, that's great, isn't it? That means it's using all of the available, at a peak time, if your site's at peak and it's using 14 gigs of RAM, then surely that's a good thing because you're using all of this. I don't know if anybody's ever worked with things like Exchange Server before, but when Exchange Server went in 2003, 2007, they made this massive, great big change to the way it uses memory. And Microsoft went along this route of saying, why don't, if it's a dedicated Exchange Server, chew up all the memory. If other applications ask for it, we'll then start to scale back. But if we've got memory available to us, let's use it to multi-thread as much as possible. And Sitecore kind of tries to do the same approach, maybe not as elegantly, but it certainly does. So you've got lots of configuration settings for how many rows get logged to the session before they get flushed, whether you flush on every visit end session or whether you flush on every 10 visit end sessions. So there's loads of ways. Out of the box, it will probably only be perfectly configured for 1 out of 10 customers, so you are going to need to do some testing. The Crest Nicholson site, which you saw there, again, we've done loads of performance testing on that site with the guys who are building that site. And we're comfortable that that 20% figure sticks. However, when you start adding on things like personalization rules, you are then going to maybe see some orders of magnitude of drop in capacity again. If you're doing an evaluation of a GeoIP lookup in a particularly slow region, I mean latency, not, and just to clarify, right? So if you're doing it in a particularly slow region, then you're naturally going to have to wait for the evaluation of Maxmine's lookup service to then return a GeoIP-based personalization rule. So that can then start to add some processing time. Again, you have to be careful with the personalization rules. If you nest 1,000 personalization rules inside the standard Sitecore UI, with the page editor, you're probably going to add, a sizable amount of load time because you're evaluating lots of data, you're evaluating lots of rules. So there's huge efforts going into refactoring that. Loads of it came in Sitecore 6.6 update 4 or 5. There's a whole load more going in for 7.1. We've got customers running 30 personalization rules on a homepage. Australian Super's a really good example. They use behavioural profiling, that's not seeing huge issues at all in that respect. So yeah, just be aware that the more start calculation you do, then you're going to have to do some planning around that. However, you can look at EasyJet. So you look at the amount of personalisation that has on that homepage. I won't lie to you, there's some custom work going on in there. And they've gone off piece with a few bits in terms of personalisation, the way they evaluate data. But you look at how fast they can run load times on their site across not as many servers as you might think, and the traffic they run is horrendously huge. They've got sub-second load times of their pages, and they're evaluating live pricing data from fare management systems. So there is a lot of work we've done there. Either way, we've been doing lots and lots of work recently over the last 4 or 5 months in terms of evaluating this, and we're starting to publish a lot of this under this Partner Pulse branding. So I'm hoping that the Partner Pulse materials will be going onto the partner network very shortly, where we can then start sharing a lot more of these materials with you. And again, it's a conversation. If you have a customer that has a requirement, you're not sure, or you're testing and things are not going right, then either raise a support ticket as an info request, not a bug, or give me a ring, and Kern and I will come and help you. And we've got plenty of guys at the office who experience this as well. I hope that was a comprehensive answer to that question. Perfect. Go for it. What was the question? Yeah. I'm not sure anymore.
If you've been tracking data for the last 6 months, can you apply value to it retrospectively? If you can adjust your goals and think, okay, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
So you've been recording a goal at 10 points for the last 12 months, and you want to programmatically go back over and update that to 15 points per goal clip.
sure. So
Super. I'm quite handy with SQL queries, so
yeah.
There's nothing in the UI that's going to do that. You can't update the goal, and then it's going to traverse back over the visits. We have done a little bit of work around that with some other parts of the data. You can actually exploit the API quite nicely. So there's a couple of load all methods, and you can pass in parameters to the load all method, which will then load all for a given visitor, given visit, or given value. And you can explore that and then start accessing and rewriting data that way. But again, that comes into that best practices guide about making sure you get the goals right, and if you change them, about what the impact of changing them is, and how the reports are going to be changed. Not something that any system has a way around. You change a goal value in Google Analytics, and it's not going to retrospectively touch your data. So. Super. Any more questions? Fire away.
Some of the stuff you showed there, I would say, is typically the domain of editors or administrators, setting goal values, that sort of thing.
Correct.
It usually comes under the remit of developers. But if I've just understood your other statement regarding performance, it sounded like you should actually be setting some of the more fixed GeoIP type lookups or some sort of personalization. That should be done programmatically rather than through the administrative interface, which will inherently slow it down. Did I understand that correctly?
That's a very good question, is how much of that do I reserve for my developers, and how much do I actually give to the marketer? Does the marketer know what he's doing? A very good question. Things like EasyJet, for example, parts of their homepage, naturally they don't exist in the page editor because they're being, fares returned from pricing engines that can have a million different variables, but you're only passing in 5, for example, or 6 or 7, whatever. You can't mix the two in some respects. So, the developer could set up the personalization rules in the UI, and then the marketer could add his own personalization rules on top. But you can't say create my component with a bunch of personalization rules and then allow the marketer to personalize on top of that. You sort of can, because you could bake it into either the common rules engine or the component presentation engine, or you could bake it into your code. That's kind of an endless question. That's difficult to answer that. I think that's situational. It's not the responsibility of the developer to necessarily set the value points, but it is the responsibility of the developer to set them up in the tree, set them up in the code, and then personalization rules might sit on top of that, exploiting goal values or goals triggered. So, yeah.
Hard-coded, it would be faster.
Potentially, yeah. I don't know. If you wrote, for example, if you did a GeoIP lookup in the UI where you're changing a data source based on matching a GeoIP rule, that might take 1 second. But if you're evaluating the same thing at your own code level, the chances is that the time that it takes for your code to execute versus Sitecore's presentation code to execute is negligible, but the time that you're waiting for is the maximum lookup. So I think that's, again, dependent on the type of lookup that you're doing. If, however, you're doing like a geospatial query where you're going off and doing all sorts of stuff in custom databases, then naturally the extra code you're going to have to plumb into those personalization rule, engine definitions to then go to your custom database. It's probably going to add a bit of an overhead than if you just wrote that straight into the component and went to it. So Crest is a good example of that. Geospatial working in a very different way. The editors can't go anywhere near that geospatial type work. Super. Go on, you first. Go on.
You mentioned we can install the analytics database onto the same database server on a web core and master if it's a low traffic site.
Sure.
So the reason I haven't been able to enable it because I don't want to pay for a dedicated database server.
Often the
What would
case.
you define as a low traffic site or maximum traffic?
What would I define as a low traffic site? Somebody
maximum
asked.
traffic, yeah.
Somebody asked. You know what? Again, Sitecore performance statistics. So how does Sitecore position servers? So we would say that the average, if there is such a thing, server configured as a delivery server could handle 60 requests per second. Whack on a couple of personalization rules, do a bit of optimization, probably back at 60 requests per second. Do a bit more optimization, rewrite caching front end if you're really into it. You know, getting up into the hundreds of requests per second. It's about peak more than it is about traffic per day. But oh god, I know you want me to commit to a figure now.
I'm looking at about 30,000 views per day.
30,000 views a day. Yeah, you'd handle that on a primary pretty easily, as long as you've got the recommended hardware specs for it. I think you wouldn't be in a bad place. I don't think you'd see major slowdown of that. If you do, don't call me. But I mean, if you do, then again, give us a call. We'll help talk you through some of these settings. But I think that type of traffic's not a lot. So. Okay. Far away.
Sorry guys. Some of our clients don't use the Maxmind GeoIP lookup. Is that applicable?
Yes, yeah, it's a web config item, turn Maxmind off. Yeah, naturally that increases speed because you're not going off and doing, increases capacity because you're not going off and doing lookups. So, yeah. And naturally, if you do use Maxmind, you have to pay them for a license, so you get about 100,000 lookups for free when you get the license, or your new customer's license, and then you have to go and pay them a few $100s a year for access. It's a very good service, to be fair. The accuracy in the UK and the US is really good. Getting into China and India is horrendous.
I configured Sitecore to use the local light machine.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, that's fair enough. Yeah, again, you don't necessarily need to use the full-on version unless you want to get down to postcode level. You're just doing regional level, then you've got more options. And again, Sitecore will also cache lookups as well. So it won't you can set it to not look up on every single visit. You can set it to reuse lookups if it's matching an IP or an IP range. You can do some clever stuff like that. So, any more questions? Well, in that case, I hope this has been useful. I'll be around for another 15-20 minutes. Maybe half an hour if you're lucky. I've got to get to Bristol in the morning. So, thanks very much for your time.
Okay guys, if you want to just give me your questionnaires as soon as you can, we'll do the draw.
Oh yeah, we've got a siren of shame for all you developers out there who run continuous integration, and we've also got 50 quid's worth of Amazon vouchers. So if you don't want to fit in, thank you very much.
Office score.
Yeah.
Next game.
Yeah, you won't find it.
Exactly.
You got a lot.
It was went for 6.5.
It's on 7 now, so this man can help We've got another one next week, and it's going to do continuous integration cases. Yeah, it's not even an hour and a half. It's continuous integration basis. Okay, you've got choice to be out then, so I'll send myself an email about that. It's just a really short looking file, and it's an action script, and it's also a guide with demo scenarios. It's a sales tool. and the code there's not pretty. So this is easy to get yeah, of course. Obviously, there was a project as well, so different coding access to the code itself. We got access to that. I hope it's useful, the marketing stuff. Positioning, you've got SDM, and then you've got cyber marketing, which is kind of being talked to. So SDM's for developers, and cyber marketing is for all the guys who sell cyber. There's just this huge gap in the middle, which we kind of realise we need to they're exactly the right person. Yeah. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Maybe that's the trick. Maybe it's a trick. What is? Charlotte.
Okay, guys, the winner is Gabriella Woodbridge.
What?
I need a picture. I need a picture. Yeah, so you know. We're not together. Yeah, well, that's the idea. We've just drawn it. Yeah, let's just see it's questionable whether yeah. See, we didn't really give the answer. It's not bad, but yeah, unfortunately, it's already one share. it's a tech user. Well, that's kind of the experience for me. Like, do one tech and then we can and it's almost online as well.
And then actually
Guys, I'm going to close the bar in a couple of minutes, so if you want to get a final drink. Last orders at the bar. Last orders. Actually, I might be talking rubbish.
So there's two ways you can do this. The first thing is you can get behavioural profiling set up, go in and create some pattern types, and then have only one. What you're going to do is custom build a behavioural profile, and you can set up context search, and you go in, you get direct access to the profile keys, and then you can say where the profile key matches this, boost the results. What you do is you then match your profile to your content. It's an algorithm that sits there and does basically an algorithm which feeds profile close to the content. So it says, okay, this is the content card, that's what it's matched. Therefore, go and do the algorithm to match my profile key, and then return content related to like you can say it's not practical. So if you already have that data in Ajax, then what you could do is you can essentially let the content editor just build those data and then just use standard queries against it. Manually boost it. The only way you can do it without going custom and fighting your own data session. So when the page is rendered, you put the tags on it, you get into the section for custom, and you user profile labels the last entry, and then custom user profile that you can output. That's what Office does actually. It's not fixed level. Or you can write into the session. Inside the analytics data, if somebody visitor tables, there are some custom fields which stuff things, and you can programmatically set key values which you don't have to use table. So you don't have to add it to a page. What you do, you can translate taxonomy assigned to a page. So manage it matters cards, and then you can say that you like them to the algorithm to match the pattern. That's fine. It's elementary, and that customer only has to be one of those. You couldn't say that half Cuba and half Republic, boost both of them. In the context of actually do it straight away, so you can programmatically set a profile plus a value, you work out that you set a value, and then set that against and then use the search algorithm to say, okay, go to all my business and work out what's the match. And you don't have to get the content to
what you can do is you can have essentially your CSS, what you can do is
We're still going to have 165 keys.
stale sheet.
What I would do is I would break it, start energetic my name, and then start creating a tracker object to convert your taxonomy string on the content item into a file key. So you're not using the page itself, writing myself, and then use this CSS, so it's all direct pipeline on the system, that's why I tell you where